Hi, everyone, and welcome to 50 Ways to Improve Habitat in Your Yard. My name is Sam Adams Lanham. I am the Community Engagement Librarian at the Barrington Area Library, and that means that I work on creating programs for the benefit of and in collaboration with our local nonprofits. I asked Peggy's permission to do a quick commercial for a couple of programs that I have coming up next week. I'm sure many of you have heard about or read of our new Barrington Area Volunteer Connection. If you're curious to know more and you are someone who is interested in maybe finding volunteer opportunities or is already volunteering and would like some more, there will be a program on Monday night, which is Martin Luther King Jr. Day of Service at 7:30 p.m. You can register for that on the library's website. If you are involved with a nonprofit in any kind of leadership or management capacity, there is a program, one of the nonprofit know-how sessions at noon on Thursday, the 21st. And same thing, you may register for that on the library's calendar. So that's the end of my commercial. As I said, it is my great privilege to be able to work with our local nonprofits to bring you programs to help learn more about the exciting things that are going on in our area today. So in honor of Citizens for Conservation's 50th anniversary, Peggy will share important ways to use shrubs, trees, native plants in all seasons, water resources, and earth-friendly practices to improve the habitat for birds, pollinators, and other useful critters. Peggy has been a volunteer with Citizens for Conservation for 16 years. She was formerly the president of CFC and is currently the chair of the Community Education Committee and serves on the board of directors. Her yard has improved habitat with over 200 species of native plants. And with that, Peggy, I will let you begin.
Thank you very much, Sam. I'm pleased to have you all joining us today. This is the first of our winter series of programs the Community Education Committee does every year. They're usually live. This year, they're going to be webinars. And at the end of the program, I'll let you know about our February program that's coming up. Citizens for Conservation has three main pillars of our mission. One is land acquisition, the other one is restoration of that land, and the third is education. And one of the ways we do that is with our community education programs. We also have youth education programs, but I'm chair of the community education program. And as Sam said, it's our 50th anniversary, and so I decided that we should have a program to launch this 50th year with 50 ways to improve habitat in your yard. But before we get into that, I'd like to, oops, that's not. Let's just talk about the habitat itself. This is a quote from Doug Tallamy that is really driving a lot of what we're doing these days. In the past, we've asked one thing of our gardens, to be pretty, and now they have to support life, sequester carbon, support pollinators, and manage water. And why has that changed? Why that? The fact is that 90%, approximately 90% of the habitat in the country has disappeared. It's been turned into farmland. People have cut down things like milkweed because they thought it was a weed instead of a plant that supports the wildlife. So we must create diversity in our own yards. There are 90% of insects depend on only one species of plants. And birds depend on insects. And so if those plants aren't there, the insects aren't there, the birds aren't there, and the birds and the other pollinators that need them for support. So we know we need to have, I've got to be doing this right now. Oops, this is what I just said. So we're about creating that habitat. And I know some of you already are doing that, have been doing it for a long time. But I hope you'll pick up on a couple more possible tips this morning. The categories that I'm going to use are native trees, shrubs, something about I call front yard landscaping, all, these different categories. I'm going to talk fast because this is a lot of territory to cover. So, and as Sam said, we're recording, and the recordings will be available on both the library platform and the Citizens for Conservation website after a little while, not immediately today, so that you don't have to be writing down everything I say, but this is what we'll be working on. Darn it, I have to keep doing this. So the first category is native trees. This is a photo at Baker's Lake in Barrington. That's the lake back in the background there. And this is what some of the Village of Barrington owns this property, but Citizens for Conservation has restored it. And this is what, it's just spectacular if you get a chance to go for a walk in May, where the ground is just covered with wildflowers. And that is what some of it looked like to start with. So if you're only going to do one thing as a result of watching this program today, I encourage you to plant an oak tree. Oak hickory woods covered the savannas in northern Illinois 150 years ago, and they support, an oak tree supports more insects than and birds, and than any other single species of trees, of plants. So plant an oak, or if you have an oak, maybe you could plant more. There's species of oaks that fit almost any condition. And I just might, this is a footnote I put on here, always plant trees and or any other plants that are native to this Illinois area. And we'll be talking a little bit more about that as we go along. Here are some oaks. I don't have exhaustive examples of each of these, but I wanted to put a couple of examples of each of the categories. And if you are looking for more detail about each of these things I'm talking about, the Citizens for Conservation website has a, right on the main page, you can see native plant database, and that tells you how tall they get, what kind of conditions they want. I've got a little bit of that information on here. This is a white oak. They are the majestic oaks. They're not the big Halloween trees like the bur oaks, but they are a big, beautiful tree. And you can see here a little bit of the what the leaf looks like. That's usually the easiest way to tell the difference in the oaks is by looking at the leaves. Another wonderful oak is the red oak. And that it says it gets as big. Typically, they are not quite as large. They need much more sun. The white oaks say sun too, but I have a grove of white oaks in my yard that are remnants. I mean, they were here before, 100 years before the houses were built. And they aren't big and spread like the one I showed you. They're tall and skinny because they grew up together, but it's from lack, a little less sun. They weren't planted that way. That's just the way that, the acorns germinated. Another wonderful tree to plant is a shagbark hickory. Look at the shagginess of this bark. They again, it says full sun, mine are, shading each other because there's so many of them. But one of the benefits of the shagbark is that things live under the shags. It is the host tree for the morning cloak butterfly, for example, a black butterfly. And it hosts a number of other things. In the winter, a lot of the critters that we like to see in the summer have to have places to shelter over the winter, and the shagbark is one of the ways that do that. Here are a number of other really good native trees that help with the habitat as well. One of these, I don't have photos of them all. I didn't have time and room to put them all out here, but the tulip tree is the host for the eastern swallowtail butterfly. So again, there's each of these, some of them host lots of different bugs, birds and butterflies, but some of them are very specific to one. The redbud on here, I wish I should have had to put a photo up because it's a gorgeous tree. If you don't have a redbud, that's another one to put in. Any of these would work. The redbud doesn't get quite as big as the rest of them, but it gets its beautiful sort of rosy colored flowers early in the spring. And the value of that is that early spring, there's the birds coming back, the butterfly, the other pollinators need pollen early, and there's not a lot of things blooming yet, and the redbud is one of the earliest to bloom. So lots of good suggestions for trees. Here's what not to plant or cut down if you have them. This is a picture of a Norway maple, and they are pretty when they're in color like this. But the problem with it is that it's not a native. It doesn't support our insects and our pollinators. It is so dense that nothing will grow under it. People say, what can I plant under my Norway maple? And we have to say nothing. Even the ground covers don't want to be under there because there's literally no light that gets through. And if you have one and you don't want to cut it down, all you can really do is put some mulch under there. The Chinese elm is another one. There aren't as many of them around, although it was the American elm that got the elm disease that got rid of so many of those. But the Chinese elm is very invasive. It pops up everywhere. You'll get little elm sprouts going everywhere. And the same is true with the tree of heaven. When I moved in, someone before me in this house had planted a tree of heaven, and it was just sending shoots up all over the place. And yeah, the lawnmower would cut them down, but it really didn't belong here. And again, these aren't native, and so they don't support our native insects and birds. The Bradford and Callery pears are the ones that you see very much along roadsides, along the right-of-way. A while back, a lot of villages planted them because they have beautiful white flowers in the spring and they don't get real big. But the problem is that they're so invasive and they cross-pollinate with our native pears. So they're driving away all of the native pears and plums that we have in our area, in our woodlands and whatnot. And I think they're on an invasive species list now. The nurseries are not supposed to sell them anymore, but there sure are a lot of them out there. And the cutting down the tree of heaven in my front yard was the first time I ever cut down a live tree. But I've gotten wiser about some of them might be alive, but they're doing damage to our habitats for sure, and they don't provide any benefits. Okay, I'm going to move on quickly to. Oh, here, quickly again, about taking care of trees. Don't mound the soil around the base and don't let your landscapers do that. What it does is holds the soil moisture up against the trunk of the tree, and it either rots or gets mold. And the roots will tend to grow up into the mulch rather than down into the ground, and ultimately will kill the tree. So don't do that. If you need to just have mulch around it, we're going to be talking about other mulches in a little bit, but just use ground up leaves. That serves the purpose better, and it doesn't need to be mounded. And of course, do not use pesticides. If you kill bad bugs, you also kill good bugs. The pesticides are indiscriminate that way. So we'll be talking more about that too. Now we'll get into the native shrubs. This beginning slide is a high bush cranberry. It's not a cranberry, but it's a viburnum, but it's called a cranberry. Lovely, lovely berries in the fall, and the birds love them. So I'm going to start this section on what not to have. Most of the time, if you have any kind of shrubs that have just grown up in your yard and you haven't planted them, they're either buckthorn or honeysuckle or both. They are both very, very invasive, difficult to get rid of, and really, really damaging to the environment. A number of years ago, Lake County did a survey of the kind of trees in all of Lake County. And before settlement here, it was mostly oaks and hickories. Now 60% of the trees in Lake County are buckthorn. They've just totally taken over. If you drive by a forest preserve, you'll see masses of this green shrub. The yellow one is in the fall turning yellow. The buckthorn stays green all the way up until it freezes. And the problem with it is twofold. It poisons the ground, so nothing else can grow under there, and it prevents its shade is so dense that it keeps the saplings from growing. So even if there's an oak tree nearby and it drops an acorn, it won't be able to survive under the buckthorn. Now, I usually say don't use herbicide, but with buckthorn, you have to herbicide it. Well, if you can dig it, that's fine if it's small enough. But if you're cutting it and there's a stump, you must herbicide the stump or it'll just come back in lots and lots of shoots. You may notice sometimes when the electric company goes along the roadsides and cuts the tops of anything that's messing with the electric lines. when they cut the buckthorn, it just gets thicker and thicker and thicker at the bottom because they don't take the tree out. And honeysuckle is another one. It's an invasive. It comes from Japan. Doesn't provide any benefit. There's a little bit of nectar in the flowers when it flowers in the spring, but it too is so terribly invasive and it's really hard to get rid of. It's another one that you do need to herbicide. And it gets real gnarly and takes up the space that you might have some beautiful ones in instead. Okay, the value of some native shrubs. In addition to the obvious of having berries, they provide structural diversity. And there are some species, like the wood thrush, that only thrive in dense thickets. And other little birds, like the juncos and chickadees, use them for protection from the predators. So they provide multiple services. I make a point of having some pretty dense shrubs not too far from my bird feeders, so that I'm attracting the birds, but I don't want them to be endangered by doing so. So they grab their seeds and then run over and sit on the branch of a shrub. Here are some examples of shrubs that we recommend. There's lots and lots more, but let's start with some of these. Highlighter. No, that's not what I wanted to do. Just a minute. There we go. The black haw here, if you have a lot of buckthorn and a lot of people have it along the roads and they say, well, I want to keep it because it's a screen. Our recommendation is take it down, cut it down, herbicide the stump, and then plant black haw viburnums. They make as good a screen in terms of a hedgerow, but at the same time support lots of insects and so forth. And they get this beautiful color in the fall. The high bush cranberry is the one that I showed the up close picture of the berries. This is one that likes to be in more wetter areas. But I have to give you a caution right to start with here. In the last few years, there's been there's a viburnum borer that's been out and about, and it isn't necessarily attacking all of them, but it sure got after my, I had a bunch of viburnum. I had the dentatum, which got eaten. Consequently, I didn't put it here. And the Morton Arboretum recommends to get rid of the borer that you clip off the ends of the stems where the borers start. And you can, if you look at them, you can see the little brown dots on the stem. And I was busy out there cutting off the tips of my high bush cranberry, trying to keep the borer from spreading, but it got both of my shrubs that were down there. So you may live in an area that doesn't have it. If you have a cranberry, a viburnum of any kind, look carefully at them. If you start seeing any little holes in the leaves, usually in the new leaves, the new tender ones, clip them off right away. But I've also found that there are some of the viburnums that haven't been attacked by the borer. I'll talk about those in just a minute. There's also this serviceberry. Now this doesn't look very dense, but it gets to be a very nice big shrub, and it has beautiful, beautiful flowers in the spring and then berries. And the berries are edible by humans as well. Of course, the animals love them as well. And then the 9-bark here is also a nice big shrub that is useful. I'm trying to get rid of this photos here. I'm not sure I can do that. Anyway, here are some shrubs that get tall, not necessarily as dense, but tall shrubs. The black chokeberry, again, all of these have both flowers and berries, and the birds love everybody loves the flowers. The birds love the berries as they do. The pagoda dogwood is one of my favorite. I have a lot of shade because of my big trees, and this one loves to be in the shade. And it has a very nice layered look to the flowers, and so to the branches, and just a lovely specimen tree. It's not so much a hedgerow as the other ones were, but it spreads out, and it then gets a really lovely berries in the fall. Here's a nannyberry viburnum. Mine haven't gotten this big, but it is one that the viburnum that the borers haven't gotten on. I'm keeping my fingers crossed and watching them. And my very favorite is a maple leaf viburnum. It stays a little bit smaller. It's this beautiful flowers in the spring, gorgeous orange leaves in the fall. And it's one of the viburnums that is happiest in the shade. It's a little hard to find. Our native plant sale in May, and again in September, we go looking for them. They grow slower, and so they're not as big when we're planting them. But they really are worth looking for. If you have shade, that would be an excellent one to put in there. Now, here are some shrubs that stay a little bit smaller, but provide both the food and the pollen. The hazelnut, a beautiful little shrub. This is the photo here is of the clump of the nuts. And of course, the squirrels love them, and so they'll go after them sometimes before you can get them. They're obvious. They're you know what. The cultivated version of them are what we buy when we buy filberts or hazelnuts. But this is the native version, and they are edible if you can get them before all the animals do. But if you're planting them for the birds and the animals, then that's a good thing to have. This is one of the smaller sumacs. The staghorn sumac gets huge, but this one, and it's just such a gorgeous color that it's a nice little clumpy shrub. The shrubby St. John's wort, there's a smaller one as well, but it wants full sun, grows not too huge, maybe 3 feet or so, but the bees love the St. John's wort. You'll just have it covered with bees. And the gray dogwood is another one that is a rather prolific native, but it's not invasive. It just comes up in the woods. It's definitely an understory one, and it has the lovely berries in the fall and a nice color. So it's got a little bit flower. The flowers aren't real showy, but they are useful for the pollinators. And then we get the berries for the fall as well. I am trying to figure out how to get rid of the photos on top of my screen here so I can see what's left here. Okay. Okay. The New Jersey tea is a tiny little, well, it's not tiny, but I mean, compared to some of the rest of the shrubs, it only gets to be about 2 feet tall, maybe 3, but wants to be in the full sun. And it's gorgeous flowers that, again, really attract the bees and the butterflies. Lovely, lovely shrub. It's another one I'm going to talk about for the front yard. It fits well there. Okay. Now, in terms of pruning native shrubs, they really should just be left to be natural. They're not pruned in nature, or the pruning happens when a dead one breaks off. So this is not native plants, but it's my neighbor. We don't need to make bowling balls or little boxes out of our shrubs. If you do need to prune selectively, and by that I mean, for example, my elderberry is sort of, its branches come way out and it's over a walk. So I will prune the branch that's hanging out, that's bumping people in the face. So, that kind of thing. But you don't want to, and you don't want to be spending the time pruning, but they really don't want to be pruned unless you just need to, as I said, take something that, or a dead stalk in the middle of it, something. Okay. Here's the front yard landscaping section. And by that, I mean, there are some villages, some local areas that fuss about how tall things get in people's front yard. We've had a number of people contact us and say, I've planted native plants in my front yard and my neighbors are complaining. And the problem is the prairie plants, some of them get to be 6-8 feet tall, like the compass plant or the big blue stem. They really aren't designed, if that's the right word. They don't belong in a front yard, in a small yard, in an area that wants front yards to be neat and tidy. It doesn't mean you shouldn't have native plants there, but there are some that you select. So that's one of the issues, but also there's some design elements that should be used when you're using native plants, just as when you're using other kinds of plants. The height of the plants is a key one, but also the edging and borders. This one, there's a walk. If you, in fact, edge a bed of natives just as you would edge a bed of non-natives. They don't look wild and scruffy, as sometimes people get fussing about them. Now, this is an example. One of the plants I don't recommend for the front yard is this Joe Pye weed. It's a wonderful native plant, and I do want you to put it in your backyards, but it works here because they've used the good design elements. They've got the low plants in front. They've definitely got this driveway edged, and so then the Joe Pye and these taller ones can fit there. But ordinarily, you don't just want tall ones out on the edges of things. I have a little bit of prairie in my front yard where I have the full sun right down by the road. And I've had to select low plants for that. And I'll share some of what kind of what fits there. But so you pay attention to some of the design elements and choose well-behaved natives so they don't go wild. The best milkweed for designed neat gardens is the butterfly weed. And it's gorgeous. It's a beautiful, beautiful plant, but it stays about maybe not even 2 feet tall, maybe 18 inches, and a nice clump. It spreads, it gets bigger, but it's not aggressive. And of course, it's just absolutely attracts all the butterflies. So the monarchs, but everything else too. So that's a wonderful one to put in the front yard. I really like the white wild indigo, the Baptisia. There are some non-native Baptisias in the nurseries. Make sure you get the Baptisia leucantha. And by the way, even if you don't know the Latin names of these, make sure if you're looking for one that you write that down. When you go to buy a plant, now if you're buying it from our native plant sale, all our plants are natives. But if you're going to a nursery or a garden center and you want to buy one, make sure you look for the native words on it. Because, for example, with this purple coneflower, and you see them a lot, and they're quite common. But a few years ago, the Botanic Gardens wanted to make a cultivar out of it, and they wanted to make it yellow. And so they cultivated the purple coneflower that was yellow, and they called it an Echinacea purpurea golden glow. I think that was the word. Anyway, anytime you see a name like that added, you know it's a cultivar and not the original native. And what happens when natives are cultivated for a reason, I mean, in that case, they were cultivating it to get it to be yellow, but they lose some of their native characteristics. And in this case, the purple coneflower, which is really, really hardy here. I mean, it's a tough cookie, but it became not winter hardy when it was cultivated, when it was hybridized. So look for the double Latin names, write them down if you need to when you're going to be going out shopping for them. Another good landscape plant that doesn't get real tall is the blazing star. These need to be in a clump because they tend to bend over a little bit if they're not supporting each other. But oh my goodness, the bees love them because, and this is something I'll talk about more, but anytime a plant has multiple flowers like this along the stem, you'll attract more bees. The same thing is true with the indigo. There's just that many more flowers that are just right nearby. They don't have to fly very far to find their next nectar. So those are always a good suggestion. And I have the indigo in a front bed, and it gets to be like a little shrub. It dies back completely in the winter, but it's about a couple of feet around and maybe 3 feet tall, and so it can be a specimen plant with littler things around it. The bee balm, the bergamot, again, this is another one. There's all sorts of cultivars out there. Make sure you look for the Monarda fistulosa. That's the native species right here. And it too is just a magnet for the pollinators. Here's a few other ones that fit well. The lobelia, the great blue lobelia, likes to have its feet wet. It's not a prairie plant. It's more a water's edge, but it does okay in medium mesic soil. But I have it in my rain garden, and it's happy there. The obedient plant, sometimes I call it a disobedient plant. It does want to spread a lot. So if you have a bigger area to fill in, that's fine. It won't stay put in one little place where you plant it. So again, that may not be the disciplined plant that you want, depending on how you're arranging your front yard garden. Brown-eyed Susans, of course, are very often seen all over the place. They start blooming late July and bloom well into September. So they're a lot of things, have already died back. The flowers are gone, and so the birds and pollinators still need them. And of course, the birds go after the seeds in the centers of these. The royal catchfly, I recommend instead of the red lobelia is called cardinal flower, and it's in the same species as the blue lobelia, but it is touchy. It'll grow for a couple of years and then not be there. It too wants to be wet. Whereas the royal catchfly is equally as beautiful, and it's tougher. It doesn't need to be wet, and it grows. It comes back year after year. You won't wonder where it went, and it spreads. So not aggressively, but you'll get a number of plants coming up. So if you want a red, white, and blue, you've got the blue lobelia, the catchfly, and the culver's root, which is a tall, spiky flower. They make a nice combination. Again, when you're talking, looking at the landscape design elements, the shapes, the colors, the sizes, how big they get, all of those elements can be paid attention to. Now, here are some landscape plants for shade. I love the red baneberry. Its flowers are little white clumps, aren't particularly showy, but boy, the green and the berries are, and they get berries along about July, which is a little earlier than some of the other things do. The columbine is another one to be careful when you're buying it, to make sure that you get the Aquilegia canadensis, because there's lots of other columbines out there. This one, the hummingbirds and the cone-shaped flowers like this are the ones that really attract the birds and the pollinators that like to get down inside the plant. There is a very nice blue columbine that is native to Colorado. It's the Colorado state flower, but that's not our native one. Here is the Virginia bluebells. This is just what one of the little heads of flowers look like. These are a wonderful plant to plant under a tree, for example, spread the whole area. They make a nice mat. They're very aggressive in their area. They transplant well if one gets not where you want it to be, but they die back completely. After they're done blooming, the leaves are there for another couple of weeks, and then they're completely gone. So if you plant a bunch of them, you want to plant and intersperse them with ferns or ginger or some other plants, ground cover type plants that will stay all summer, so that you don't have a bare space after these have died back. But boy, they're showy, and they're early. So again, all the pollinators love them. The woodland phlox is one of my favorite because it's very showy. Some of the early spring woodland plants are right down on the ground. They're very little, and you have to look. They're lovely, like the little anemones, but you have to be up close to see them. This one, I have my house is on a hill, and I have about half an acre between the yard and my house, and then another half acre in the backyard. And these can be blooming up around all over the front yard, and they're visible from the street. And the flowers last a long time. Some of the early ones are pretty ephemeral, but and they do spread. They'll sprinkle themselves here and there and wherever they want to be, but they're transplantable. So if one comes up where you don't want it, you just move it to where you do want it. And it's just, if you don't have those, I highly recommend you get some of these, even if you already have good habitat. This is a shade plant. It can take some sun because it comes out in the spring before the trees have leafed out. So it's getting sun then. It wouldn't do well in hot sun in the summer, but the leaves stay all winter. Not all winter, all summer. They don't die back when the flowers die back as the bluebells do. So you have a nice landscape clump there even when the flowers are gone. And here's the native geranium. And again, there's tons of geranium out there. This one, the geranium maculatum, is the native. And again, it supports all our native insects. And it too it's like this phlox, it sprinkles itself around. It can do sun or shade. If you have an area that doesn't have much planted in it, put some of these in, and they don't get big mats. They just sprinkle themselves, so you have
Mound.
I'm sorry?
Okay, there it is. You're right.
Now, there are some well-behaved grasses. There are some prairie grasses I mentioned earlier, like the big blue stem and maybe Indian grass, that really aren't meant for front yards, for nice native, not neat little plants. planted areas, but here are some that are. My very favorite is a prairie drop seed. It stays in this little clump, maybe 2 feet tall at the most, spreads wide because it's called drop seed because the seed heads just come over, bend over. You can kind of see a little one coming down here and drop their seeds out on the sides. It's very conservative though. We have them in the prairie, but we also grow them at CFC in our native plant nursery because the seeds don't compete real well with other aggressive plants. So we make sure that we have enough seed to plant. Yours in your yard will stay put. It'll spread. It'll get bigger, but not aggressively. And just as a nice counterpoint to some of the plants, you might put it, for example, with that butterfly weed, the orange milkweed. They are compatible in terms of size and shape. The little blue stem is a good landscape plant. It gets to be maybe 3 feet tall. It's not short, but it doesn't get 6 or 8 feet tall. And this is in the fall when all these little white fluffy things are the seeds. And it stays in a clump. I saw a company, a business headquarters had its front area landscaped with native plants, and they had a lovely patch of the little blue stem and this side oats grama. This is in the prairie, so there's a lot of it here, but it gets its seeds hanging off on the side of the stems. I don't know, it's really tiny on here to see. Lovely little plant, doesn't get real tall and stays in clumps. So those would be 3 I would recommend if you want grasses amongst your planting in the front yard. Okay. Now, here are some other natives that are wonderful for habitat, but are a bit too aggressive and or too tall for a tidy little spot. This purple hyssop gets to be, maybe 6 feet tall, a pretty big thing. But it is just a magnet for insects, for bees particularly. Let me find what I have here. And the milkweeds, all of the best milkweed, as I said, for the front yard for a tidy area is the butterfly weed. But this one is a common milkweed, Asclepias incarnata, is the one that was growing a lot along the farm fields that people thought were weeds, or the farmers thought were weeds, so they cut them down. And so we lost all of that habitat for the migrating monarchs. They have to have a place to stop on their migration. And it's the flowers are beautiful, as you see here, but it's pretty aggressive. It'll pop up here and there and wherever. And if you have a spot where that's okay, that's wonderful. Or if you're planting it and you want it to stay, look more intentional, plant a bunch of them. Don't let one be there. And then it looks like it's a weed that came in. In fact, that's the case with a lot of these plants. Don't plant one. It's easier for the pollinators to find them if in fact you have a clump of them rather than just one of these and one of that, okay? We recommend that to people that are shopping at our native plant sale. Oh, I'd like a bunch of different things. Well, buy at least 3 of each of them so that they can be in a nice little clump both for the visual of it, but also for the pollinators. This prairie coreopsis is another one that it spreads well. So if you want it to spread, that's a great one to have. The rattlesnake master is definitely a prairie plant and it wants to be full sun, but it's a little bit too tall usually for a tidy little garden, although you might try it. It doesn't get massively tall. The seed heads though, they're a tough little ball, almost like a medieval mace, with a ball with the spikes on it. We collect the seeds, on our prairie so we can spread them other places, and you have to pick them with gloves on. But anyway, the birds love it. The chickadees, the goldfinches, we have to get them before the birds do. Although if you're planting them for habitat, you just love having them there for the birds to get, and they last. The birds will still be getting them in the fall. And here's the purple Joe Pye. There's two versions of two species of Joe Pye. One is better. The purple Joe Pye is the sun or shade, and the spotted Joe Pye is a full sun. But they do get to be 6 or 7 feet tall, and especially in the sun. They're wonderful for the pollinators, but again, they're not. You wouldn't want it probably right by your front door unless you have something tall around it, I guess. Don't mean to be negative about these, but they're, the right places for things to be planted. Okay, I've been talking about the pollinators, so let's look at them. You see the bees on here, they're just everywhere on this showy goldenrod. Goldenrods, by the way, get a bad rap because they bloom at the same time as ragweed, and ragweed is the one that causes the hay fever, and the goldenrod does not. And yet people say, oh, I don't want goldenrod because I have hay fever. Well, I am a hay fever sufferer, and I have lots of goldenrod in my yard, and it doesn't bother me. I just make sure I dig out any ragweed that's around. So do plant milkweed, as you know, for the monarchs. Other butterflies like it as well. But here's a monarch caterpillar on the milkweed pods. Okay, and this is a swallowtail that its specific plants that it likes is anything in the carrot family. The meadow rue is one of the plants that is. If you have a vegetable garden, it might like your carrots. And there's other, I think kale is in that same family. I'm not a real expert on the vegetables. But the other plant that these like is Queen Anne's lace. Now that's not a native, but you do find it around along the wood sides and sometimes in the prairies. I let mine come up in along my roadside until it's done blooming, and then I pull it out because it's very aggressive. But you can, if you're planting to get a specific plant for a specific pollinator. By the way, the best source for that is, there's two, but one of them is Doug Tallamy's first book called Bringing Nature Home. I think it's about a third of the book at the back that specifically says, if you want this butterfly, plant this plant. And it gives you, and it has sections by, I mean, it's a national book, but it has sections by, you have the Midwest. It doesn't just have Northern Illinois, but it does have which ones are native to which section of the country. And of course, nectar plants, all sorts of nectar plants for the summer. That's not so hard to do. Most of them fit that bill. And in the fall, you need to make sure you have something still blooming for the migrating monarchs. They still need the nectar to beef up for their long migration south. And in fact, I'll get on to my next slide here. You want to have multi-flowered plants. As I mentioned earlier, the liatris is one, the bergamot, goldenrod's just masses of flowers like that. And here is a rusty patched bumblebee. Can you see the little space back here that says rusty patch? Those are endangered in Illinois. And we've found them in our properties in Flint Creek, Savannah. And this was oh, by the way, all of these photos I have give credit for at the end of the program. When I get to the birds, Stephen Barton is going to be our presenter in February, and he just has the most extraordinary photos of birds and bees and other butterflies and whatever. He's just an extraordinary photographer, as well as having planted native plants. I just want to make the point, somebody at a program, we were doing a program, the Chicago Living Quarters program on bees a while back, and somebody said, well, I would like to plant these things that I'm not sure I want to have bees in my yard because I'm allergic to them. And I think the issue is not bees. Bumblebees don't sting unless you try to squeeze it in your hand or something, but they don't jump out at you and sting like the wasps and the yellow jackets do. If you're stung, and you walk by somewhere, like I've had the wasps get into my brick wall around the front of my house, they aren't bees. They're yellow jackets or wasps, hornets. And so don't blame the bumblebees, and try to allow things that support the bumblebees and not, seriously. And the wasps aren't the ones that are out there usually on that. They're the ones that bother you at the picnic table. Okay. Okay, there are other pollinators too that we need to pay attention to. And I don't know if you know this, but ants are the second best pollinator and propagators, but pollinators next to bees. I love the story of bloodroot. I've had some bloodroot in my yard way at the far back, and then I'd find it sort of coming up in little spots way far away from where the big patch of it was. And I thought, how it's way too far for the wind to carry the seeds. How is it getting there? And it's way too far for the roots to spread. And then I learned about elaiosomes. The bloodroot has a large seed, quite large for the size of its flower, like a ½ inch across or so. And inside, it's got a green coating on it, and inside is a pulpy white and a pulp, actually, that the ants love. So the ants grow the seed, eat that pulp, and then drop the seed wherever which is left inside. They don't eat the seed, they eat the pulp. And so they're carrying those seeds all over, and they germinate, and we have, the bloodroot propagated here and there. It's another one that transplants well, by the way. So if your ants put it somewhere you don't want it, you can dig it up and move it. But also, the bad ants, the carpenter ants, pileated woodpeckers eat them. So if you have those outside, I know you don't want them in your kitchen, but if you have them outside, maybe the woodpeckers will come. We are, by the way, getting more pileated woodpeckers around here. They were gone for a long time. So don't go putting pesticides on your anthills in your yard. They're good. Do what you want in your kitchen, but not trying to stop them from being outside. Then there's a story about dragonflies and damselflies. They need to hatch, the nymphs have to hatch in water. So not bird baths, but in if you have a stream or a pond. But they also have to have plants along the edge because the nymphs can't fly. So to get out of the water, they have to climb up on a plant. And so if you have any water's edge, we'll talk a little bit more into the water category, but if you have rocks along there instead of plants, the nymphs won't be able to get out and they'll die, and you won't have dragonflies in your yard. They also need clean water. They will not do with pollinated. So I said, don't use pesticides. Pesticides kill every kind of a bug, caterpillars that the baby birds need. But now here's an example. These are milkweed beetles. They are native. They don't do any good, but they also don't kill the plant because they have evolved together. And if they killed the plant, they wouldn't be alive either. So if you don't like them on there, take a bucket of soapy water and with a glove on, just scrape them off and into the water. And you don't have to have them there. There's so many of us that still are squeamish about bugs. But don't use pesticide, because then you'll kill all the ones that that you want, the good bugs. Okay. All right, quickly now, hurry up. Gotta get to the birds. This is one of Steve Barton's wonderful photos. The bobolink on the milkweed. And the fact is that different bird species need different habitats. So the more species you're trying to attract, the more kinds of habitats you need. I don't have bluebirds, for example, because they really prefer open prairie. But some of you who have bigger open spaces in your yard, if it's not just turf grass, and you can put some plants in there, like the little blue stem I was showing you, the bluebirds are more likely to have the bluebirds come. This is a Steve Barton photo. Isn't that wonderful with them sitting there? Woodpeckers prefer snags or brush piles. So I have lots of woodpeckers in my yard. I do have some snags, but they also just like to be on my oaks and hickories. They go pecking for bugs in there, and they make nests in there. And not all wrens, but the sage wren prefers sedges. So the sedge wren prefers sedges. That's a mouthful. So if that's a specific, I haven't put a lot of time in on the sedges, but that is one of the benefits of having them. And of course, the sedges go to seed too, so the birds get the seeds. I don't have photos of them, but the thrushes and catbirds prefer thickets. So have an area, as we were talking about earlier, about the black claw viburnum or the service berries that get dense and they can nest in there. Now, there are very different kinds of seasonal needs as well. If you want to attract the migrating birds in the spring and fall, they need food. They need both shelter. They need shelter in both the spring and fall. So think in those terms. The nesting birds need twigs and fiber. But in the spring, if you've cleaned up all of your native plants in the fall and cut them all down, and then they haven't started coming up yet, when the migrating birds come and want to be making a nest, they won't have any nesting material. So leave your stalk standing until the new plants come up in the spring, so that the birds can find something to make a nest out of. The stalks, for example, of the my purple coneflower are still out there. And by the way, things live in those stems during the winter too. Sometimes only the monarchs are the only birds that really, maybe one of the few that migrate, certainly that migrate as far as they do. And so the rest of them lay their eggs and stay, dormant kind of over the winter, but they need a place to do that. And so they need the twigs, they need thatch. And then, of course, there's the birds that put their nests in the ground that need the thatch and grasses. There's another interesting thing. The fledglings, even though their nest might be in the tree, they may fall out of the nest before they can fly. And if it's just bare ground under there, if it's lawn turf grass, they don't have any protection. So they really need some ground cover under the trees to help them, survive until they grow big enough to fly. And of course, in summer, some hummingbirds need lots of sources of nectar. Your hummingbird feeder is fine, but also get lots of those flowers that have the tubes that they can get their beaks down in and get the nectar out. It's amazing. I don't have the number in front of me, but the amount of nectar that hummingbirds do every day. Thought I had I don't remember these numbers easily, but anyway, and then of course in the winter, the birds need the seed, the nuts and the seed sources, and that's one of the reasons to leave some of the native plants standing. The monarda is another one that has wonderful seeds for the birds to get well into November and December. When the snow knocks things over, it's not as easy. But they also need places to stash food, like the squirrels do, but the other ones do as well, and shelter. Now, there's different sources of food. I've been talking about the bushes that have berries. These are a repeat of some of the ones I talked about before. This is a Steve Barton photo of the cedar waxwing with the berry in its mouth. Isn't that a wonderful photo? Get it? I think that's on a black chokeberry bush. And I have a picture of the winterberry. And oh no, I don't. I have the snow. The winterberry has the red bushes, red berries on it. And I do have a photo of that coming up. You also, of course, need nectar plants. And here's a hummingbird on the silene, the royal catchfly that I showed you the picture of before. So it's happy there. I haven't mentioned these, but the virgin spower is the only native clematis. It's a climbing vine, and it does grow in some shade and sun. A wonderful source of nectar. And it's Baltimore orioles as well as the hummingbirds that go after these. The nodding wild onion is another one that I hadn't mentioned. We did talk about the columbine, but most of the tube-shaped flowers are great for the sources of nectar. And then, of course, seed. Now, the black oil sunflower seeds and millet, which come in most of the mixes the seeds you buy, lots of birds like those. And some of these birds go, and like the woodpeckers will go there as well as on the suet and so forth. Obviously, you've got the thistle feeders, the ones with the tiny little openings, the little birds, the chickadees, the finches, but also indigo buntings. I think the jays, I don't see I see the jays on my suet a lot. I don't see them on my Niger seeds. I fought the battle with the squirrels over my suet feeder until my son for Christmas gave me a squirrel buster suet feeder. I had the squirrel buster seeds, but so that it's just a wire mesh. But if the squirrel gets on it, it closes, and the squirrel can't get at it, and it makes the suet last. I was doing everything on my other suet feeder. I put Vaseline on the post so the squirrels couldn't climb up, and they did anyway, and so forth. So I have every kind of woodpecker. I even saw a full red-headed woodpecker, which are very rare, but they've been, I live not very far from the Deer Grove East Forest Preserve that's been restored, and the woodpeckers they've seen the red-headed woodpeckers there, so they've come a little ways over into my yard as well. Of course, you need the fruit and the berries. You know that the Baltimore Orioles want their orange halves. To get at, and any other kind of berries on the trees, and the nectar and sugar water, as we talked about. I'm going to move real quickly. This is what you don't want in your habitat. I had a cat for a while that was an outdoor cat, and there was no way I could keep him in, but luckily he went after the chipmunks in my yard, not the birds. But my present cat doesn't go outside. I won't do that again. And I real quickly want to get through the 4-season appeal. I've talked a little bit about that, but there are some things that are specifically spring plants that are just lovely. I didn't mention the Jacob's Ladder, lovely, lovely spring woodland plant, can take some sun. Shooting stars, wonderful. A good one. These of course bloom early and then don't continue. The shooting stars die back a little bit later. The Jacob's Ladder keeps its leaves as the phlox does all winter, all summer. The prairie smoke is another wonderful landscape plant. Wants to be in the sun. This is when it's flowering, and then its name from smoke comes because when it goes to seed, it's got this fluffy little seed head, and it stays little and very well behaved, as we say. Summer. You know about sunflowers. There's several of them, but make sure again that you're getting a native one. This is the Western sunflower. The liatris, this is, notice you can see the bee on here. We talked about the Eastern swallowtail on the meadow rue and on the red milkweed. Now, this is one that you may need to pay attention to. A lot of people don't, do all the summer plants, but the fringed gentian blooms in August, September. I don't know if you can see it, but there's a katydid sitting on here. He's green and he blends right in. Beautiful plant. They're a little bit hard to grow, a little bit fussy, but the bottle gentian is another gentian that is much easier. Here are the goldenrods again with the bumblebees on them. Lots of different goldenrods. I have the elm leaf goldenrod in the shade. Most of them want sun, but the elm leaf is just as beautiful and supports the bees. These are woodland sunflowers. Most of the sunflowers are full sun, but if you have a wooded area, these are lovely, and they're somewhat aggressive, but they sprinkle themselves around in the woods when nothing else is blooming there, and that really is a support for the pollinators that still need the pollen. And be sure you have some asters. And again, need to make sure that there's lots of native asters. They are just an attraction for the butterflies, and they bloom well right up until frost. So they may be the only thing blooming for the last of the monarchs that are ready to do their migration. In the winter, here's my pale purple coneflowers with the big seed heads on them. Oh shoot, sorry about that. This isn't a very good picture of a white pine, but they have the pine cones that the birds use all winter long, both on the tree and on the ground if they get them. And of course the acorns, and I say I have a nutty yard because I have oaks, hickory, and walnuts. My hazelnuts were too shaded to do much, but those will last. And of course, they not only do the squirrels bury them, but the birds will even eat them in the spring if they still find them. And this is the winterberry. And it's got these lovely red berries on it, and they'll last all winter until the birds get them all. But a nice showy shrub against the snow. And real quickly, a little bit about water. It can be all sorts of forms. Some of you may have ponds and streams. Almost all of the wetlands in our area are absolutely choked by Phragmites, which is this big one. People say they look pretty, but they are this the most aggressive thing you can imagine, or the reed canary grass. Get rid of those and put in native plants. This is a friend's yard on Honey Lake. The lake is green here in the summer, but this is her lawn, and then she's got the the buffer in here between that and the water, and it's full of critters. She's got, and her neighbors have the buckthorn right up at the water, and it's black and dense and nothing lives there. This is my neighbor's yard. We have a stream that runs along by the road. And in mine, I tapered my hillside and planted native plants on it. She didn't. She put rocks along it. And of course, when the heavy rains come, it undercuts the rocks and they all went into the stream. So work on erosion. If you have if you have the bad invasive stuffs along your stream, the Phragmites, the giant reed here, usually is really, really tough to get rid of. The roots go 10, 12 feet sideways, so you can't pull it. You may, if you have a small patch, you might be able to smother it, but they're really tough. You might need to get a professional. The landscapers that work with native plants around here have the equipment to go out into the wetland and have the kind of herbicides that they can use to kill them that doesn't get into the water. But you do need to work at getting rid of it. I drive by the wetland on Quentin Road, just south of Lake Cook Road. And years ago, as I drove by, I could see the blue flag iris and the marsh marigolds blooming along the edges. And now it's just completely choked out with this Phragmites and reed canary grass. Critters need shelter. They need food and they need clean water. And if you have some, it's nice to attract the water birds if you have a big enough wetland. Although I've had ducks in the spring in my tiny little stream, so they go looking for water. And as I mentioned, dragonflies must have water for the nymphs to hatch, and they must have plants along. And by the way, they don't want a pond with a plastic bottom. They need to have mud. So put your pond in and put plants in it in the soil rather than a liner. I won't take a lot of time about rain gardens. We could do a whole hour on rain gardens, but they are another source of water. This is Alicia Tim is our head of the Habitat Corridors program, and this is her rain garden, and you can see the plants along here. There's the water after a heavy rain. And this is the blue flag iris and the marsh marigold that are just lovely to have in a rain garden. And they provide, it's an opportunity to provide all the things that the birds need and the pollinators as well. And if you don't have a pond, or even if you do, you should have some source of water. They need water. So here's a bird bath in the summer. And this is Meredith Tucker's heated bird bath. There's a little bit of an electric cord. It has to be able to plug in, but here it is sitting in the snow, but the water is not ice. I mean, it keeps it warm enough for the birds in the winter. And she said she loves to just watch them coming to them all the time. I don't have a winter one yet. Real quickly, we've talked a little bit about ground covers. Here are some that you might want to pay attention to. I recommend for your habitat that you create compost. This is my, I have a big compost pile behind my shed, and I put the leaf, I would tend to chop up the oak leaves because they take a long time to disintegrate. But the leaves in the fall, all the grass clippings in the summer. I don't put weeds in it because it doesn't get hot enough to kill the weed seeds, but I do put any of the plant clippings, you know, that I'm cutting down, deadheading in there. And it makes this wonderful compost that I use mostly to top dress. You know, I have terrible clay, but I'm not digging very much anymore, but I'll put it on the surface of it, and it continues to help it. If you want mulch, leaf mulch is best. It's native, the thing that beasties love to live in it. But there's also a reason to have all of the, not have bare soil and not have imitation mulch. But here are some of the ground covers. I think you probably know about the wild ginger. Sedges work. They're a little bit taller, but they can serve as a nice ground cover. I love the ferns. These are my maidenhairs, but any kind of a fern works. Virginia creeper is the woodbine. It has a bad rap because it climbs up trees, and people think it kills the trees, and it doesn't. But it really does hold a lot of, serves a lot of habitat needs. Lots of moths. Get rid of the English ivy and put in Virginia creeper instead if you have that. And then this is the Virginia waterleaf, which gets a little bit taller, but I have it around the base of my oak trees. It's fine in the shade. It has this lovely bloom on it, and the bees love it. And it's so much better than just a bare old mulch. There's some of the ones that are more happier in the sun. The sand prairie phlox is just gorgeous. It spreads and it makes a nice little mat. If you have a dry, sort of a sandy area in the sun, that would be a great thing to add. And then there's the purple lovegrass, an interesting little grass. It doesn't get tall, but it spreads. So you can have, instead of turf grass, you can put this one in. And whatever, you don't buy cedar mulch. I think it's just absolutely criminal to cut down wonderful cedar trees to make mulch out of their bark. That just doesn't make sense to me. Although they cut them down to make the lawn furniture and then use the bark for mulch. And don't buy dyed mulch. That's not adding anything to the habitat. The best mulch is leaves, but if you're purchasing it, look for coconut coir. It's ground up coconut husks, so you're not damaging trees to get it. And it really does add good nutrients to the soil. And finally, a little bit about critters. The amphibians, if you have water, you'll have some of those, maybe some turtles. We all have raccoons around, and the possums, most of them, the possums are vegetarian, so they will eat some things. The deer and rabbits, with those, this is in my front woods, a deer looking at me, and they're not afraid of anything. I just use a lot of deer off on the plants that I know they like to eat. Particularly in the spring, they love the tender young shoots of things. I have the native hydrangeas, and they just will eat them right down to the back base if I don't get the deer off on them. That's my best. And I tried a deer fence, but I didn't do the right kind, and they just jump right through the wires of it. By the way, spiders aren't that bad. And again, you may not want them inside your house, but birds do eat those. And we haven't seen many fireflies around, but that's because their habitat is gone. They must have leaf litter to live in the winter. And if they only have turf grass and bare soil or mulch, you won't have them. And yes, we have some bad bugs. But even these, the birds are happy eating the Japanese beetle. If you have a landscape company and they say, oh, you've got to put a pesticide on your lawn because you've got grubs, don't let them do it, because the robins and the ground birds, like mourning doves, will eat them. Not much we can do about the gypsy moths. As I mentioned earlier, we can do the viburnum borers if you can get to them early enough. I'm running over time. Real quickly, I've been talking about some of the earth-friendly practices. This is one of my backyard pictures. Get rid of some of the turf grass. Don't get rid of all of it, but see, all of these trees could have rings around them. Instead of shade, they could have a nice base under them. This is a good way to plant under trees. This is the phlox, and this is the Virginia waterleaf, and this is a golden Alexander over here. Lots of choices, shade plants or sun. And as we said earlier, don't put the mounds around them. Leave your leaves on the ground in the fall, not necessarily on your lawn, not on your lawn, but certainly in your beds. Leave snags and brush. Leave the stems, as we talked about. By the way, the elderberry has sort of hollow stems, and that's a great bush for the critters to live in the winter. Leave the seed heads for the finches. It's good. This is my yard. Well, I was right before the snow, a messy yard, but it's got a purpose. So don't use pesticides, use herbicide very sparingly. And by the way, native plants do not need or want fertilizer. Fertilizer just sometimes makes them get leggier or something. It's not really just save your money and don't do that. One last point about light pollution. It is the main cause for the loss of insect species, especially moths. It helps the predators get at them. It disorients birds. I don't know if you know about, there's conservation folks that go around the streets of Chicago early in the morning during migration seasons around the big buildings, because the birds bump into the buildings because of the light and then either die or in some cases land, and the conservation folks are trying to save them. Motion lights work if you want security, or use yellow LEDs. Apparently the yellow light doesn't cause the problems. This is what not to do. So I hope you enjoy your habitat year-round. This is in my backyard looking at my deck. You can make a difference. You can obviously add habitat. If you can't do it all at one time, make a point of adding some. Come to our spring sale in May. We have our pre-sales that starts in April or in March, I think the end of March. Look on the CFC website and you can find that. And by the way, here are the photographers that have contributed to the photos on my program. And my friend Wayne Schild, who is unfortunately in the hospital right now with COVID. But he, all November, October, November, he was the one that made these things move and created all the pretty backgrounds for my slides. So I really thank him. And here are some resources. We have the native plant database on our website, as I said, citizensforconservation.org. We have the native plant sale. It's always the first weekend in May. And our Habitat Corridors program that provides the site visits in the Barrington area. We don't go to the whole Chicago area, but there are other organizations that do. I referred to Doug Tallamy's book. I put midwestgroundcovers.com on here because they grow the natural garden natives, which are local eco-type native plants. They don't sell them retail, unfortunately, but they do sell them to some of the local garden centers. So if you go on the Midwest Ground Covers website, look under natural garden natives and you can see a list of the places that sell their plants so that they don't want to compete with the wholesalers that they sell to, so they don't sell them retail, but you can find those at other times when the spring native plant sales aren't happening. And here's another good resource. The National Wildlife Federation tells you which plants support which insects locally, so you can get that information too. And then some video resources. The Chicago Living Quarters has been doing webinars since June. And there was a program, I think this was in, I don't know, August maybe. These programs, more specifics than I was able to give you about each of these with my overview, but they are on the ChicagoLivingQuarters.org. Look under resources and video, and each of their programs has been videoed and has been recorded and put under there. And they're all wonderful presenters with lots of details. And then this is the program we're doing right now, which will also be is being recorded and will be available. And I want to tell you about our February program. This is Stephen Barton that I've been talking about, is this amazing photographer, but also about all of the things he's done in his own yard to create the habitat and then to be able to photograph all the critters. So be sure you plan for that. It's a Saturday morning again in February. So with that, I think we are open for photos. I mean, for questions.
We're open to photos too, but
Yeah.
we did have a number of questions that came through for us. Could I ask you to stop your screen share?
Okay.
You can end it so people can see your lovely face.
Well, I have to get rid of that.
There we are. Excellent. So I tried to group questions as they came in in the same order as which you went through the information. So we're going to jump back and ask a few questions about trees to start with. First, about trees.
Okay.
Okay. So the first are just a couple of comments that came in. One is someone who wanted everyone to know that shagbark hickory is great for bats.
Oh, okay. Thank you.
And the tulip tree may also be called a yellow poplar. So you've got that information. We had somebody who asked a question about tulip tree that it had been suggested that she avoid planting that because it only supports one species. Do you know anything about that, or?
The problem is there's more than one thing called a tulip tree.
Ah.
And I don't have the Latin name of the native one here.
I think
right now.
Yes.
But if I don't know if you can contact me at citizensforconservation.org on there, and there's a contact. If you send me your name, I'll look that up for you and get the Latin name of the native tulip tree.
Okay. I will say also the library has a number of Doug Tallamy's books, We don't specifically have bringing nature home, but I buy for that area. So I will look and see if it's still available. My guess is we probably owned it at one point and it, fell apart, got old or whatever.
Yeah, it's probably, more than 10 years ago that it was published. It's
All right.
it's still kind of a Bible, but he has new books, which I
Yes.
could recommend as well.
I actually know we've got one on order that's coming out, isn't available yet, but The Nature of Oaks, the Rich Ecology of Our Most Essential Native Trees is coming soon. And it's in the library catalog now, if any of you are interested in that one. So next, sorry, I just, as one does, made all my things disappear behind something else.
Yeah, there you go.
We have someone who asks a question about planting under oaks without disturbing sensitive roots.
That's a very good question. The white oaks particularly have their roots very close to the surface. Don't use a rototiller for sure, but you can plant shallow rooted things, and some of the things I was talking about, like the Virginia waterleaf and the ginger and whatnot, have pretty shallow roots, so you can dig a little hole and put them in, but don't and if you need to top dress it with some compost, don't try to dig up the whole area. When I moved in, they had grass under all my white oaks in the backyard, and I was trying to keep, and the things like the Dutchman's breeches and whatnot were coming up, and I was trying to keep the lawnmower from, no, don't cut those down until I was able to get rid of it. And I had to smother the grass. I didn't want to try to dig the whole thing. So we smothered the grass, and then we're able to and then I didn't even need to do much planting because the native things wanted to come up. They were trying to, and the grass was keeping them from doing so.
Great. And as so often happens with people who love gardening and love talking about it, we had, and I just sent a message out to everyone with the Latin name of the tulip tree. With
wonderful.
A couple of people provide it in the chat. So we're good there. We have a question about the fallen leaves and leaving them whole as opposed to shredding. That they'd heard that leaving them whole enhances the habitat for caterpillar that harbor in the whole leaf.
That is true. And you really should have some areas that you can just blow the leaves over off your lawn and leave them in the garden areas. I do that, but I also I need to shred the ones to put in my compost because otherwise they don't disintegrate fast enough. So we do both. But I have a shredder, but I also when we run the lawnmower runs over the lawn, it shreds the leaves as well as the lawn, and that all goes into the compost pile. But then I have a yard service, and I have them blow the leaves into the woods, or leave them. I have a wooded area that just the leaves are just naturally there. You do need to have some whole leaves for the caterpillars. You're right.
Okay, great. Thank you very much. Thoughts on black walnuts?
People think that they do have, there's an allelopathy, which is the black walnuts killing some things that are under them. And I tried for a while to get a white pine to grow. And I went to the nursery, this was years ago, and they kept saying, well, it doesn't have pine blight. We don't know what's wrong with it. And then I was taking courses in the horticulture program at Morton Arboretum and learned about allelopathy. And that is some things kill other things, and black walnuts kill white pine. So I couldn't have a white pine under it. But now I have elderberry under the black walnut, and it's fine. They love it. I have, earlier I showed you the red baneberry. I also have white baneberry under my walnuts, and that does fine. The ginger does fine. There's a lot of things that will be fine with it. I suppose there's more that aren't. I'm trying to think of what, other than the white pine, I don't know that I've tried to plant anything else under the walnuts.
Okay, well, you kind of segued into a question that actually just came in that relates to that. Was someone asking for ground plants or ground cover that can survive under black walnuts. So of the things you mentioned, ginger is a ground cover.
That's right.
Right.
The Virginia waterleaf works fine. I didn't say anything about violets, but they're a fine ground cover. They are a native. Yes, they get in your lawn, but that I like that. I don't need to have a pristine lawn, but they'll grow just about anywhere. The Joe Pye, the spotted Joe Pye is going fine under my black walnut. So that's not a ground cover, but I mean it's
Something that'll work.
it
Okay.
wants to be there. Yeah.
Can I chime in here? Karen Rosine.
Oh, hi, Karen.
I have read in several places that red bud, it does fine. You can plant red bud underneath the black walnut.
Okay. I am gonna, if you could put your comments in chat and I'll read them out. It's just easier for recording. Thank you. And same person who asked about ground cover asked specifically about red bud. So thank you for anticipating that. And serviceberry. And then we have someone who said Morton Arboretum website has a long list of plants that will survive under black walnut.
Wonderful.
So,
yeah.
and they mentioned, someone else mentions ginger, ferns, Jacob's ladder, and wild violet that grows under the walnuts. So, okay.
The other ones I have under a walnut that are the spring ephemerals, the uvularia, the bellwort, it's one of those bell-shaped flowers that the pollinators like, and I have shooting stars are under walnut. Trying to think of what else is in that bed. Wild geranium. There's a lot of things to do.
Okay.
Yeah. You can also ask me which ones the deer don't eat.
Yeah, right. So the next section of questions that I have are about shrubs, and unsurprisingly, the first three are about buckthorn.
Uh-huh.
So I think some of these are kind of related. So first, we have one listener who said, while they're walking in their yard, they can pull up small buckthorn trucks, roots and all. Is this actually getting rid of them, or are they going to resprout?
No, that's the best way to do it if you
Okay.
can. You can pull up by the root. Yeah, you don't have to use an herbicide. You can, and in the spring, usually when the ground is soft, the same thing is true with garlic mustard. We didn't talk about that as an invasive, but pull it up by the roots. By the way, one of the programs on the Chicago Living Corridors website is I did a program on invasives, just on invasive plants and how to get rid of them. So that's recorded on the CLC website.
Okay, great. Thank you very much. Also regarding buckthorn, what herbicides, are there specific herbicides that you recommend using on buckthorns? And I don't know if this is a related question or not, so I grouped them together. What to put on buckthorn stumps when you cut them down in the winter?
Yeah, you can get a Roundup that is for woody plants. That's about what you can buy. In restoration, they're able to buy other kinds of herbicides, but they're not generally just on the market for common use. I really hate to promote Roundup, but only use it on buckthorn. You're okay.
On buckthorn, not on windy
And
days.
you don't have to do it. You put a little. You don't spray it. You put a little bit in a bottle cap or something, and use a little paintbrush, and just paint the stump, so you're only getting it right on the buckthorn.
Could I interject something here? I know you said to chat. I'm not getting my question to send, but I had a huge buckthorn thing growing, and I chopped down all the branches and I burned them on top of the stump of the trunk. And that was well over a year ago, and I have not seen one new sprout of that thing. And I have tried everything on buckthorn in the past. Now, it was an open area of wetlands, so I didn't have to worry about the fire, spreading into anything. But I chopped down a bunch of invasives around it too, to make sure it didn't spread. And that really worked.
So maybe like the fear and intimidation tactic, right? This is what you have coming if you keep trying to grow in my yard.
That's right. Fire works.
Well, and Citizens for Conservation in our restoration, we burn the prairies, and if there are little shoots of buckthorn coming up, that's one of the reasons you burn. They wouldn't get a big old, huge old tree, but it'll get the little shoots that way. But that's good to know. Yeah, thank you.
Okay. Then moving on from buckthorn. Oh, I'm sorry, not moving on from buckthorn yet. So after you have gone through and painted your stumps or, used that herbicide in small areas, do you need to wait before you plant viburnum or other replacement native?
That's a good question, and I didn't address that. Yes, because the soil is poisoned, and you need to have it, a season maybe or so. I think the shrubs are better, but if you were to put little, tender woodland plants, they probably wouldn't do very well. You can dig some of that soil out from around the buckthorn and replace the soil, but yeah, you don't want to immediately put something in. And that's a chore because you don't want the buckthorn seeds. Oh, by the way, even after you cut the buckthorn down, the seeds are still in the ground for a couple of years, so you'll continue to get more little shoots coming up. You just have to be real persistent with it.
Okay, right.
By the way, just a little anecdote about buckthorn that I didn't say. Its genus is Cathartica, and that's because birds eat the seeds, but they don't digest them. They go right through them and they plant them everywhere. So, as in,
Yeah.
what is the?
A
I don't know.
remedy
There's a medical word for that.
Yeah. Rhesus. Okay.
Narcissus, I was trying to think of.
What native shrubs do not sucker and spread? And the listener specifically said because they have chokeberry that's coming up everywhere.
Oh, there's a lot of them that don't. I didn't even mention the spice bush because you have to have a male and a female of that, and if you get you get both, you get berries otherwise. And it's a pretty sparse tree, so it's not a dense enough tree really for habitat. Let's see, which ones do I talk about? The service berries, just they make a big clump, but they don't sucker all over the place. I don't think, at least mine haven't. And the maple leaf viburnum are quite conservative, and that's a nice, smallish one. It doesn't get massive. I don't know what size you need, or you also have to pay attention to the, what's wet or dry or mesic kind of soil. By the way, the very last program from the Chicago Living Corridors that was Thursday night was on native shrubs, and that is going to be posted on the CLC website, so chicagolivingcorridors.org. So
and the libraries as well.
Yeah. Oh, right. Yes. Great.
Yeah. I have several questions, a handful of questions still to go through, and we're getting more coming up in chat. So I think what we'll say for the ones that are coming up in chat now, I will copy them and send them to Peggy, and we'll include those answers in written form, but we still have a dozen or so to get through.
And I ran over, and now we're running over time. Yeah.
I mean, we're only 2 minutes over. I think we're fine, but we could spend a lot of time on these things. So I don't want anybody who's putting questions in chat now to be like, hey. So
to you, yeah.
If we want a tall shrub as a filler, is it okay to use staghorn sumac? Is it a native, basically?
Yes, it is, and yes, it is okay. It doesn't, it spreads out. It doesn't get real dense, but yeah, absolutely. And it does have the nice seed heads on it in the fall, so that is a source of food. Yeah.
Okay. All right. You mentioned butterfly weed, and I think that was specifically the tuberosa.
Yes.
Is that one that could tolerate being in a roadside planting where it might get some, splashed from salts and things like that in the winter time?
I would say probably don't, but I don't know that for sure. It's pretty tough, but it's not. I mean, it wants to be tempered a little bit, so maybe not.
Maybe not. Okay.
Now I have my New Jersey tea right by the road, right by my little prairie by the road, and it does fine.
Okay.
I don't know.
Right.
It's not a milkweed, but it's one that is okay.
Yeah. Backyard habitats. We had someone ask, how do you transplant wildflowers yourself without harming them? The listeners never seem to survive transport.
Well, they differ. Some of them are much more transplantable. The wild ginger, you can, the roots go sideways and you can cut them off and take a clump up, and it does just fine. I've transplanted my woodland phlox, as I mentioned, all lots because it pops up in lots of different places, and sometimes I just like it more in a clump. Most of them, I think, well, the bigger they are, the harder it is. The prairie plants have roots that go really, really far down. I've never tried to transplant purple coneflower, not coneflower, Joe Pye wheat, for example. It has really deep roots, and I'm not sure
How it would do.
how that would work. But some of the little ones, if you just take a clump with the soil and put it right back in the ground someplace. I've transplanted my Jacob's ladder a lot. I've transplanted ferns. I transplant a lot, actually.
Okay.
When I open a new bed, instead of buying new things, I just have lots of stuff I can move around, and so I do.
Let's start out. Okay.
The one thing that I found that does not transplant are the hickories.
Okay.
I get little hickory things coming up all over the place, and sometimes they're not in a place where they can live, like a foot away from a side driveway or something. And my neighbor was wanting to add more trees, and and we dug way down, and they got a root that goes down, but it was more work, and then it didn't survive. So,
Okay.
I think you're better off buying one that's already potted and grown in a pot, so its roots are in a clump.
Okay. All right. Next is, we just had someone who, and it appears that they are familiar with the photograph on the fringed, is it gentian? Is that how you pronounce it?
Yeah.
Okay. That is not, the one with the katydid on it is not in fact fringed gentian, but is prairie gentian. And it says it was taken on the knoll at Flint Creek, Savannah. So.
Thank you. Yes,
Very
when
good.
you say that, that's exactly right. I'm going to have to. Did I have it labeled fringe, or did I just say fringe? I'll have to go back and look. But thank you for catching that. You're absolutely right. It's pretty rare.
Yeah.
Well, it's a fringe gentian for that matter. But
Looking at water plants, water gardens, what water plants are safe in a pond that dogs are going to drink from?
Oh boy, a lot of. You mean because of their being trampled?
I think it's that, I know like with house plants, there's a list of plants you shouldn't have in your house if you have pets.
Oh, for the dog.
For the dog.
Oh, I thought it was for the plants.
Yeah.
Oh boy. I frankly don't know.
Okay.
I would tend to think that things like the blue flag iris and the marsh marigolds, lots of the sedges, I don't know that any of them put any poison out, but I've not ever wanted to drink the water. So
Right.
But they aren't not plants that you'd eat either.
So who, I guess, if CFC didn't have that information on their site, would you go to an extension? Would you try the botanic gardens?
Yeah, the botanic gardens has researchers, so they are more likely to have known, looking at something like that. That's an interesting question. I'll have to see if I can't find some information about that. But I don't have a dog, and so it's not something I personally paid attention to, and I've never heard anybody ask that before. But I would tend to think you'd have to be looking at which plants have, I don't know, juices, whatever it is, that would go into the water from the plant that would be dangerous for a dog.
Yeah. I know, for example, the dog I had before the current dog, I had used a little bit of cocoa shell, not coconut, but the cocoa shell that smells like chocolate. And the dog before was an extraordinarily well-behaved dog. She would never have eaten it in a million years. Where this dog will try anything once, so I can't have cocoa shell mulch anymore. So things like that.
And is that the same problem that you have with dogs eating chocolate?
Yes, for the same reason, the theobromine, I think it's called. Actually, I'm so glad you said that. I know that there is a book that we have at the library that is specifically about landscaping when you have a dog.
Oh, wonderful.
I can't think of the exact title, but I know that
which ones the dogs don't damage as well.
Right.
But.
Yeah, it's both ways. What will survive a dog running over it and what will not harm the dog. So
interesting. Good resource.
Again, I would I will try to put that in the notes for the video.
Okay.
So I'll find the thing. We have someone who, actually, this is me, I'll be honest. I had a problem with ants last year, and we tried, the boric acid, all the things, and they just kept coming back and kept coming back. And I finally figured out they were getting in where my sliding glass door is. There's just that minuscule little hole. And I'd read on went to a site about what's safe to use, and they suggested cinnamon. So I took a Costco-sized shaker of cinnamon and put it all along the edge of my sliding door, cleaned all my counters with vinegar, and no more ants.
Interesting.
Work.
I've had success with boric acid.
Yes, that will, once they're in, that will get rid of them, but
I
prevent them
currently have an ant nest under my deck, and they'd come into the kitchen from there. And I just, on the outside, just along the edge of the deck and the house, I put the boric acid, and that made a difference. Yeah.
Excellent. We have someone who asked if CFC offers tours of members' gardens. Is that a thing that you have done?
We have. We haven't scheduled any recently. We could certainly do so again once we can all be back out doing things.
Yeah.
We'll
we can
probably
see each other.
probably wouldn't be this spring, but we could do that again. I've done tours of my yard. In May is the best time because I have all the woodland wildflowers, but not this year.
Okay. We do have someone who asks for a virtual tour, so that's something we'll put in the hopper as an idea. Maybe the library and CFC can do something like that for April. Put together a virtual tour.
Oh,
that might be fun. Yeah,
Uh-huh.
April or May.
I have not been able to do that because I don't have the camera skills to be able to do that and be talking at the same time. So
right.
I take lots of still photos, but not videos while I'm walking around.
Yeah. Maybe we can find your partner or someone.
Yeah.
To stand. Yeah. Someone mentioned in chat that the ASPCA has a list of plants that are poisonous to pets. So that's a good resource as well. Look at that.
Okay.
And does CFC have a list of landscapers that specialize in native friendly techniques in the area?
We actually, the best source for that is on the Chicago Living Corridors website.
Okay.
They're under resources. I think it's under resources. Anyway, dig around and find it. We will make recommendations based on the circumstances, but we don't just publish a list of them from CFC.
Okay, but CLC,
I could
Chicago
talk
Living
to
Corridors,
yeah,
would be a resource for that. Excellent. I think those, I know that there are other questions that came up in chat, or just suggestions, recommendations. I don't know that we have time to get to everything that is in there.
Yeah.
But I will share these with you, and we'll try to come up and answer them in another format.
Okay.
2 or 3 other things to mention. As we said, it will not be instant. It will probably take a few days, but both Citizens for Conservation and the Barrington Area Library will post the recording, so you can refer back to things. I know there are things that I missed because I was retyping questions that came up in the chat. So that'll be there as a resource for you. Towards the end of her talk, Peggy mentioned the landscape lights, that sort of thing, or front porch lights. I did a program with someone who works on the dark sky, I can't remember the full name of it. There is a dark sky organization, and this gentleman works at the Adler Planetarium. So I did a presentation in collaboration with Go Green Barrington, and that is available on the library's website. If you go to our homepage, scroll all the way to the bottom, there's a link to the YouTube, and then it's under Community Catalysts for Why a Dark Sky. And there's a lot of information there. It's much more pervasive of a problem than I would have expected, to the fact that our skies are never completely dark, that our world is never completely dark, affects cancer treatments.
Oh, for
I
heaven.
never ever would have made that association.
It's bigger than I put on my slides. One of the things it does is affects migrations.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, he's got a great graphic that shows kind of how that works. So, and then part of the reason that the library is working so hard to do these partnerships with local environmental groups is that we are very fortunate. Some of you probably know we started a seed library last year, shortly before everybody had to go home and stay there. But the library does have the Barrington Area Library has a seed library. I know many CFC members helped with collecting native seeds and donating them to us for repackaging this past year. So we'll hope to be offering that again within a few months. And also we are going to have a teaching garden in the coming months. They've dug out space in an area behind the library, and we're working with several local groups, including CFC and some others. I think the local Rotary is donating some benches, so it'll be a pleasant place to sit. So yeah, we're really excited about that group project.
I might just add, sort of along that note, we are renovating the demo garden around the Citizens for Conservation headquarters on Highway 22. And we got some things in last summer, and we're put some more in, and people can just come over and walk around, you know, and look at it. We do organized tours at Citizens for Conservation, particularly of Flint Creek Savanna, because that's a mature prairie and savanna. And you know, it's not your backyard or your front yard garden, but if people are just interested in seeing these plants in their native habitat, you can ask for a tour, and we'll do that.
Excellent, great, thank you very much. All right, again, I have a bunch of people who are saying thank you, thank you, thank you in the chats. So I will pass those along. People really enjoyed this, learned a lot from it. And again, we will have the recording up if you register. Obviously, if you're here, you registered for the program. So I will send an email out to everyone who is registered with a link to it. And it will also be available for future reference through the library's YouTube channel or on CFC's website under their education tab. So, all right. Thank you very
all.
much.
Hope we see you at our February program. Look for that.
Excellent. Thank you so much.
Bye-bye.